Thank you so much, Maria, for joining the endowment to set the scene for the Summit for Democracy here in Washington by spotlighting what you have been talking about, the global threat to democracy from disinformation. The endowment's been a longtime partner of Rappler as you've faced pretty remarkable online attacks, arrest warrants, and convictions, part of what you've described as death by 1,000 cuts. And now you are days away from accepting the Nobel Peace Prize. You've come a long way from that feeling of vulnerability to accepting the Nobel Peace Prize. What does this prize mean to you? And more broadly, what does it mean for the cause that you're defending, press freedom?
I think it's all connected. When we first started talking about this, it was a new weapon. There was a new weapon that was being used against journalists. And, when journalists come under attack, democracy is under attack. The Nobel Committee, I think, is spotlighting something that I've called kind of like this invisible atom bomb that's exploded, and it is in our information ecosystem. Damon, the last time a journalist won this prize was in 1936, Karl von Ossietzky, and he didn't get a chance to go to Oslo to pick up his award because he was languishing in a Nazi concentration camp. Right? So giving this award to journalists again this year seems to be a signal that, here we are again coming to another moment where, and you see this in all the stats, over the last 15 years, the number of journalists under attack have increased. Over the last decade, if you go to the World Press Freedom Index, conditions have just gotten worse for journalists trying to hold power to account. But I think the most important part, and we spent a lot of time talking about this, you and I, is the role of technology as the accelerant. And I'll go back again to the kind of connection to World War II and post-World War II. It seems to me like this is a sliding door moment for the world, that we take one path and we can save our democracy, and we take another path and we go further into a descent to fascism. And I don't use that word lightly. In fact, the very first time that fascism really entered my vocabulary was with you in 2018 in Berlin, when Madeleine Albright's book had just come out. We were discussing this along with tech. You guys had pulled together a fantastic group of maybe 12 to 15 people to just talk about old power and new power and what we were going to do about it. Well, here we are. Many years later, after a January 6th in the United States, when frankly, Silicon Valley sins came home to roost. The things that had happened to us in the Philippines in 2016, our dystopia has become your dystopia. And that's, I think, what we're facing in the world. It is a world that has been dominated by technology, that where technology is insidiously manipulating us now, has been allowed to do that, and where truth has broken up, where facts are debatable, and where trust is non-existent. These are conditions, if they persist, where democracy can't exist.
So I think part of this is why we're leaning in so much to the Summit for Democracy, because it is the defining challenge of a test between autocracy and democracy right now, fueled by technological innovations. But in many respects, as you said, the Philippines was really on the front end of this storm, if you will, a storm that's now engulfing much of the world. You described your own country as patient zero in this respect. So why is that? How did disinformation become a potentially existential threat to journalism? And why did it start so early in the Philippines?
So first, let's just make sure we know, the difference between misinformation and disinformation. I talk about this all the time to Western media. I mean, why call it misinformation when it is very clearly disinformation, and it is very, very clearly linked to information operations, a tactic of war, right? And in our case, in the Philippines, Oh, wow. In 2016, I called us the canary in the coal mine. Facebook itself called us patient zero. We were there in Berlin again, where when Katie Harbath and I had that discussion. Um, how did it begin? Look, we were the guinea pigs, and the target was you, right? Why? Why the Philippines? Because this is the 6th year in a row that Filipinos have spent the most time online and on social media. Another factor, 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook.
Hmm.
Facebook essentially is our internet. And, you know, the company I helped co-found in 2012 helped the rise of Facebook. We started on Facebook. I drank the Kool-Aid. I believed in social media for social good, social media for social change, because there is that possibility. And I haven't completely given up. We remain a Facebook fact-checking partner, one of 2 Filipino fact-checking partners. But look, as early as I was able to corner the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, Christopher Wiley, a few years ago, 2018 again. And shortly after that story broke, he had told me that the Philippines, that Cambridge Analytica and its parent company, SCL, had long been operating in the Philippines, and that they tested these tactics of mass manipulation in countries like ours, where law enforcement is weak. They could test relatively with impunity and not be held accountable. So if the tactics of manipulation worked, they could then take it and port it over to the West. And as we know in 2016, right, think about it like this. 2015 was when instant articles was brought into Facebook.
Mhm.
And then the dominoes began to fall in 2016, right? So it's kind of like seeding a meta narrative. So the dominoes began to fall May 2016 with Duterte's election as president. About a month later, you had Brexit. Then you had the Catalonia elections. You had the elections of President Trump. You had the French elections with Macron after that. When Facebook took down 30,000 to 50,000 fake
Right.
accounts, right? So this is now, it's been more than 5 years. We can see the pattern and the trend. But I guess what isn't said often enough, because the public debate centers on content moderation. Uh, it's down here. We don't have to deal with content if we actually go to the root cause of the problem, which is way upstream here. It isn't about free speech or content. It's about algorithmic bias and algorithmic amplification. It is about what kind of emotions, you're not even talking content necessarily, right? What kind of emotions are allowed to travel like toxic sludge at lightning speed through the information ecosystem? And I think the last big part that's extremely different is that in the past, the media ecosystem of every country tended to have its own vertical system. That's when traditional media was in control. But now, when you have these platforms, the technology platforms, American social media platforms, and I've mentioned Facebook, but of course, in the Philippines this year, YouTube is now ahead of Facebook in
Mhm.
terms of the number of Filipinos on the platform, right? YouTube, Twitter, platforms. I mean, all these American social media platforms essentially now connect us in a way that humanity has never been connected before. And I think the biggest problem still stems back to the United States, because by saying that these platforms are not liable for what they feed us, what they allow to taint the information ecosystem with, it has allowed this kind of information dystopia. And until that stopped, countries like mine in the Philippines, countries in the global south where institutions are weaker, are the most vulnerable. And that's frankly where you've seen the most violence.
I was going to ask how you see this interaction between the technology, the platforms, and authoritarian regimes. I mean, you've mentioned before that Filipinos were offered to be trained in Russia and China. You've observed that the tactics developed in the Philippines then have been exported to the United States. What's the nexus between the platforms, but also the learning that takes place among authoritarian leaders?
We've talked about the dictator's playbook, haven't we? I mean, look, something that was developed for marketing, which is really what this was, right? Has now been used. These kinds of micro-targeting tools have been used by governments. And let me be more specific. Social media has become so sophisticated, has been, in their words, optimized to keep us engaged. So by design, they have over the last decade, right, been able to come up with algorithms that keep us on the platform, a very easy one. And this is how we grow each of our own social media networks. And if we grow our social media networks, then the platform itself grows. So something very simple like how, what algorithm they used, something which they A/B tested, and every social media platform uses this, friends of friends. That's what powers the algorithm, the recommendation engine for growth, right? So here's what happened in the Philippines when Rodrigo Duterte was elected in 2016. In 2016, up until 2016, we didn't debate the facts. Everyone agreed on the facts. They may have different opinions and analysis of the facts, but we were all pretty much, traditional news group, we're all there. In the center, we agree on the facts, right? But in 2016, shortly after Duterte's election, and his leadership style is very similar to former President Trump's. It's an us against them, kind of violent, using anger and hate. Well, here's what happened using the Friends of Friends algorithm on social media. If you're pro Duterte, you move further right with that Friends of Friends algorithm. If you're anti Duterte, you move further left. That's 2020. 2021. And then as we move forward, right? So from 2016, the division grew. And that division actually then allowed, because you don't see another side, you're not given another side, you are then, that creates these filter bubbles, this echo chamber, where you become far more radical than you would normally be if we had a shared space around the facts, i.e. the old world. All right. So then beyond that, the algorithms, the recommendation engine in terms of, let's just say you click on a YouTube video, a 9/11 conspiracy theory. Well, the minute you do that, you're going to get recommended something that is more radical. And that brings you down into the rabbit hole. All of this has been already shown in research, right? Proven in research. The fact that lies laced with anger and hate, lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further on social media. And yet, the world's largest delivery platform for news is Facebook, right? So these very same platforms that prioritize the spread of lies, anger, and hate are the ones that deliver the news to you. So when I say it's a behavior modification system, we are treated like Pavlov's dogs because this is an ongoing experiment. When you take your cell phone and you click or don't click, it's a perpetual machine. If you're recommended something and you don't click, the machine takes that and then puts it into the model that it's built of you. Machine learning allows that model, and then artificial intelligence comes in and delivers your most vulnerable moment to a message, to either an advertiser, that's a new type of advertising, or to a government. So disinformation takes that micro targeting that is so specific, that is individual in many ways, and allows an insidious manipulation that was never possible before. I think we have to get to a place now where we begin to think and talk about where the line is between agency, free will, and this type of advertising. And I'll push it one step further. Harvard Emeritus Professor Shoshana Zuboff wrote a 750-page book where she outlines the entire economic model, right? Which is based on a very extractive process of our data. to the point that every single problem of privacy, of antitrust, of safety, everything goes back to this business model. Who owns our data? If you go to, it's like going to a psychiatrist and telling the psychiatrist your deepest, darkest secret. And then that psychiatrist goes out and says, yo, here, who wants to buy this? That is the model of us that technology now allows. And that's part of the reason this is an existential moment, because this kind of power and this kind of connection is at a level where it's creating emergent human behavior. We've never been at this point before, and this requires action from all of us.
So that is part of the premise of why leaders are coming together at this Summit for Democracy to kick off what the administration is calling a year of action. So how do you, I mean, clearly this requires some collective action. Where do you see potential for like-minded nations, over 100 democracies to varying degrees, coming together in common cause on this challenge? What would you like to see come out of this?
The biggest thing that's been missing, and we talked about this in 2018, Damon, the principles and values that guide democratic nations, right? And I'll talk about it in terms of the way we think in Rappler. The Venn diagram for Rappler, every company, every startup had this, but for us, it was technology, journalism, and then and community is the last one. And Rappler is in the center of all of that. Trying to find a solution to these problems also fits that kind of Venn diagram for me. The first step is technology, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that the way this crisis is described by a biologist is the one that really resonates the most with me. E.O. Wilson, who studies emergent behavior, actually said that our greatest crisis is our Paleolithic emotions, our medieval institutions, and our godlike technology, right? So, and that's really it if you think about it, right? Because the platforms bypass our rational thinking. Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, the ways human beings think, right? Well, journalism, democracy, these are thinking slow processes, right? But the way our news is delivered to us, social media functions on a thinking fast process. It bypasses our rational mind and goes to our emotions. So that's where our Paleolithic emotions are. Our medieval institutions, kick into this is why you convened that gathering in Berlin in 2018. We have to kick into the 21st century. Where's the Better Business Bureau in terms of protecting us, protecting users? I have been attacked so much on social media. There's a study by UNESCO and the International Center for Journalists that looks at almost 500,000 attacks against me, 60% of which were meant to tear down my credibility, 40% to tear down my will. And I'm only one journalist, right? So that's the second thing is, so tech, put some guardrails on tech, right? And why is tech allowed to make so much money at the cost of its users? So you go back to who owns that data? Can companies be allowed to take our privacy and turn it inside out? For the United States, Section 230 gives these platforms the ability to continue doing what they're doing. And yet when I look at quick wins, because the Philippines has presidential elections in May 2022, and you cannot have integrity of elections if you don't have integrity of facts. I look at every single legislation around the world and it will take years to get there. But look at Section 230. If these platforms are liable for the harms that they allow, then that, I bet, would move very quickly. So first is, the guardrails around technology. The United States put guidelines around genetic research, CRISPR technology very quickly. Why didn't it put guardrails around the technology that can manipulate our minds, that can change our reality, that can create mob rule, right? And I don't say that lightly, because this emergent human behavior that the social media platforms are creating is almost like, because of what it has prioritized in terms of what spreads, the toxic sludge that spreads through our veins, our nervous system, right? It's like it encourages the worst of human nature. There's this old cartoon where, there's a devil and an angel on your shoulder, and they're kind of both whispering into your ear. And I don't know if you remember that, but you listen to the angel and you try to do the right thing. But what if the angel has been gagged and flicked off your shoulder, and the devil has been given a megaphone and turned into a giant, and that is the only thing you hear? That's the equivalent of what is happening in our information ecosystem. And you can see this in the papers, the Facebook files that the latest whistleblower, Frances Haugen, has released, the playing around with weighing emotions 5 times more, when anger is weighted 5 times more, and that is what you reward. It's so easy and so like freeing to be angry. And yet, where does that build you? It is so easy, so much easier to destroy than it is to create. But is that what you really want? So to answer your question, when this happens, the information operations that then take advantage of these same tools has brought us to this point where this year, Oxford University's Computational Propaganda Research Project said that these cheap armies on social media are rolling back democracies in at least 81 countries around the world. And I have seen that number just grow from 2017. Sorry, I didn't go to the solution. So the first, tech. Put the guardrails on tech, and you got to do it now. Because if you don't, look at the elections happening next year. There's the Philippines. The Philippines will be at an existential point for our democracy, right? There is Brazil. There is Hungary. I mean, look at these elections, because we're certainly not going to get the same kind of emergency response, break glass moments that the United States elections got from these American companies. And yet, look at what happened on January 6th, right? That is despite that. The second part, sorry, the three, right? I'll just finish the three, right? The first is tech, the second is journalism. We have to help independent media survive, because who would have thought that I could have gotten 10 arrest warrants in less than 2 years? Who would have thought that I would have to really think hard about how much I want to sacrifice in order to do my job, in order to protect the facts, in order to protect the truth, right? Journalists shouldn't be burdened with all of this, but I think we have held the line. So, how do we help independent media survive while nations, civil society are trying to put guardrails on tech? Well, so our business model is essentially dead. The advertising model for journalism is dead. And simultaneously, we are under attack on those very same platforms. It's part of the reason now that I agreed to co-chair the International Fund for Public Interest Media, along with the former New York Times CEO, Mark Thompson. Our goal here is to be able to raise new money, and I think that's critical, from overseas development assistance, just ramping it up right now. If you're a democratic nation and you believe in these values and you believe in facts, right? Right now, only 0.3% of ODA.
That's right.
Journalism. If we can just ramp that up just a little bit to 0.5 or 1, you would go a long way towards helping independent media survive. And then finally, the last one is our communities, right? The division in our societies have happened because of the way the distribution of the facts or the lies. The lies get to people. It's like a virus of lies infects real people, and it changes the way they look at the world. Well, we have to tell our communities this is happening. It isn't a bipartisan issue, right? We all have to agree on the facts, because if you don't have facts, we have no shared reality. There's no starting point to begin to negotiate the kind of world we want to live in.
Maria, thank you for that. That is a way forward. I was going to push on that important part of what the endowment, we put almost 40% of our support now goes into independent media, digital platforms, investigative journalism, because this is an area of crisis. And so coming out of the summit, how you enable media markets to work for democracy, I think has to be at the top of this agenda, something that will be, you have had a loud voice on that, we'll be championing with that. Let me bring us to a close with this, just asking, this has not been an easy path for you. I mean, you've faced a lot of harassment, intimidation, really threats of violence. You've had to bring in considerable security to Rappler as well. What motivates you? What motivates you to fight this fight?
I don't think I ever had a choice, right? I mean, this is my 35th year as a journalist, and I became a news head. I was a reporter for almost 20 years, and then I decided to choose home. I have two passports. I'm both an American and a Filipino, and I decided that I was going to make the Philippines my home when I turned 40. And I thought at that point I was old enough to have real experience, but young enough to still be able to build. And look, when I became a news head, the baton was just passed to me at the wrong time. You know how I wish it wasn't me, but
Maybe the right time, maybe the right time.
you know, I don't think, like, there's this great, I'm a science fiction fan, and there's a great quote from Ursula Le Guin where, you know, and I'm going to paraphrase this about the mage. Like, you know, people think that as you get older, that you have much more choices, but it's actually the opposite. You know, if you are who you are, you made those choices when you were significant, when you were much younger. And then as you get older, your choices narrow. I had no choice. If I am who I am, and I believe in the mission of journalism. I have helped write the standards and ethics manuals of at least 4 news organizations I've been part of. If I am who I am, then I have no choice but to continue doing what I'm doing. And, you know, like you said, is it good or bad? Well, it's almost like I spent my career going to the gym, and I'm ready for this moment. And I'm lucky because there are people like you. We've known each other for a bit. And the people I worked with when I was in my 20s at CNN, you know, they are now running news organizations. So in many ways, even though social media gets rid of context, gets rid of the past, we are who we are. And I guess I had no choice but to do what I do, but I'm also very lucky because I'm alive to still keep going. I am not in jail. There are many others who have it far worse than I do. And the best thing I could do is to give it my all because this moment matters.
Maria, you drive home the agency of how much people, how much individuals matter, how much a passion really can help change things. And you have inspired so many. We've been proud to work with you, Maria. We're going to be cheering you on in the coming days as leaders gather for the summit. We're going to hope all eyes are on you as you accept this Nobel Peace Prize. Well-deserved, well-earned. Congratulations, and thank you for giving us a little bit of your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure.